There it is. Oh, that thing freaking cracked it. Just off the edge. Boulders, sand pocket, Green Bay walleye. All about transitions. That fish is sitting right on the edge of these boulders and this limestone edge, going into a little sand pocket. And they love cruising on those edges, looking for those gobies. We're just throwing a hair jig to imitate that goby on the bottom, and that thing absolutely cracked it. Such a fun bite. So right now we're in our end of April period and we're fishing these post-spawn walleyes. And the interesting part about Green Bay is it's one big system, but it breaks down in a bunch of different sections. And we have things that transpire at different times. Now, today we're over on the east shore. We've got a lot clearer water over here, deeper water, cooler water. And the post-spawn bite over here happens a little bit later than our typical west shore bite, which is a lot shallower, a lot dirtier water, a lot more tributaries. A lot more of a delta on that side of the bay versus the east side here. We have a lot of rocks, limestone, and deeper water. So it's interesting and fun because we get to target multiple different time frames, and we can kind of chase that bite throughout the season before we lose it and the fish start to slide off a structure and get more into their summer patterns. So we're kind of getting to the tail end of our post-spawn bite here on the east side, fishing deep, clear water, and it is a blast. The fish over here are just built different. They've got broader shoulders, in my opinion, and are super fun to chase. So when I break down the bay or timeframes for customers when they're trying to book trips, I kind of ask them, what are you looking to target on? Are you looking for pre-spawn fish, post-spawn fish? Because it all depends. But generally I break the month of April down into 3 sections, basically 10-day timeframes. So the first 10 days of April are generally our best fishing for pre-spawn walleyes. The big giant bellies, you're shot at a 12, 13, 14 pounder. That time frame from the 10th to the 20th is when these fish are generally going to be spawning. They can be up in their tributaries, up in the shorelines. They can be kind of moody and a little bit tough to catch. They're not really focused on feeding so much. Then after that post-spawn period, you get into that 20th to the end of the month of 30th, whereas then you can target your post-spawn fish on our west shore, and then those fish will also start to filter over to our east shore as well. So for the east shore bite that we're on today, it's generally your end of April and then leading into the beginning of May. One beauty of the Green Bay is that we don't have a closed walleye fishing season. We can fish for walleyes year round. So as soon as the ice comes off and we can get a boat out, we're generally down there with chisels and chainsaws to break open the launches. But it doesn't take much with that, other side of the bay, that dark water that's coming in, a lot of runoff and such. This is actually pretty good fish. That water heats up quick. Whereas this stuff on the east shore where we are today is clear and takes a little bit more time. So we're fishing these. This is just a small BMC bucktail jig. And I do a couple different things with this jig, but the one major thing you'll see right now is this fish is hooked by the stinger. I had her by the single hook here when she started thrashing at the boat. She popped that, but these little handmade stingers that I make with an upgraded treble. This is that BMC hybrid treble, number 8. Super sticky, and it's really high quality hook for these bigger fish. So these fish on the east side are generally a lot darker, a lot more gold to them. You can see this fish here is beat up from spawner. Her dorsal's messed up a bit from spawner. Her fins are beat up, but just the width and how these fish carry their weight all the way in down through the body is absolutely awesome here on the east side. We got this big river delta or marsh delta on the west side of the bay. And our fish are coming over there to primarily spawn. So a lot of times the fish aren't sitting on any specific structure. I would say it's 90% sand. So the two things I'm really relying on, the biggest one, or the first thing I start with in the morning, is my temperature gauge. What is the temperature of the water where I'm launching my boat, which is generally going to be in a river mouth. And once I get out into the bay and I'm running, I'm going to be looking for any kind of spike in water temperature. Maybe it goes up a half a degree, maybe it goes up 2 degrees. Any kind of warm water, as soon as I see that spike on my hummingbird, we're gonna pull the boat down, pick up our mega side, and start scanning around and looking for pods of fish that are roaming around in those shallow sand flats in that darker, dirtier water, and then set up controlled drifts to position ourselves to catch those fish. So then where it differs is once we get over to the east side, we're generally targeting these break lines that have sand cups in them. Our fish absolutely love sand, and there's so many rock structures here on the east side. We're generally looking for sand cups that are adjacent to those spawning areas that those fish just get done with. We've got a lot of shallow bays here that these fish will go back and spawn in, little feeder cricks in those as well. So once those fish pull out of those feeder cricks and they start to come around these corners and get more into the main basin of the bay, They're going to be cruising these rock edges, feeding on gobies and whatnot. And then where you, the angler, can come into position to target them is these nice sand cups. And it requires a lot of side imaging, a lot of time graphing. But this is a lot of what I'm looking for, these sand pockets like this adjacent to this edge. And then this is where all your gobies are going to hide, are in these rocks and boulders and crevices and cracks. Just coming into the edge here in a second. I've got all my waypoints laid out down here on my bottom graph, showing me all my red waypoints. These are basically all the edge of that rock transition right there. So you're going to see here in a second, we're just going past the red, and this is the sand pocket out here. So we'll pan up to the top screen. Now you're going to be able to see sand here. You're going to be a little sand cup over here, right? Because now we're coming into this corner, and now we've got sand all the way here. So this is the edge that I'm really focusing on right here for these walleyes to be sitting in, and then all that, those bait and the gobies to be sitting in right there. So then once we drop down, we find our pods of fish on our mega side. It comes into putting the 360 down and then fishing those pods, where not only now do we have the side imaging working to our advantage with a controlled drift, we can also now make pinpoint casts with our Mega 360 that's always rotating and looking around the boat. Because like I said, there's no structure on the west shore for those fish to relate to. They're constantly moving. So at one point they can be on this side of the boat, they'll be on that side of the boat, and then being able to see where they're at and then make pinpoint casts to those pods of fish is incredibly crucial. Then whereas when we get on the east shore and I've actually sat down and then graphed all those sand cups with my side imaging, it comes into making a lot of times controlled drifts on the Great Lakes with these big waves, and making sure that we're fishing as close as possible to those transition edges. So I'll use my side imaging to kind of see where the back of the boat is and position it. But as I'm drifting sideways, I don't get the best image with it due to the fact I'm going down my beam. So that's again where my 360 comes into play. As it's rotating, it can constantly see where the boat is positioned. Now, being a guide and having customers in the boat, I always want to put them in the best position possible. So the 360 allows me to see where the transition is. Is it underneath my feet in the back of the boat? Is it 10 feet in front of the boat? And then I can position my Minn Kota forward or backwards to make sure that my customers are on that transition, to put their bait in the best position possible. So when it comes to Green Bay walleye fishing in the spring, it's a pretty short selection of baits. Primarily, I'm relying a lot on lipless crankbaits, your rip and wraps, a lot of hair jigs, and swim baits. It's pretty basic in those three lures, but where Green Bay comes into play and makes it interesting is all the different colors that we have. Our fish are incredibly color picky. I've been able to fish all over the country in Canada, and I don't think I've found a place that's more picky as far as colors. The amount of colors that Rapala and other brands have come up with specifically just for Green Bay to target our walleyes is absolutely insane. The biggest thing that influences my choice as far as which of the three I'm going to grab is based off of our wind. Our fish in the Great Lakes love wind. The more wind we have, the more active the fish are, and that goes back to the more active they are, the more aggressive you can fish them. When it comes to those glass, calm, flat days, I'm generally going to reach for a hair jig, something really light in weight, 1/4 ounce, maybe a 3/8 ounce hair jig, and just kind of slowly twitching that thing across the bottom. And then as we get more wind to pick up, you can get into more of the rattle baits, like say the rip and wraps that are a little bit more aggressive. You're going to be moving them a little bit more. They shake, they're loud in those fish, and they're going to pick up on them a lot better in the windier conditions versus your flat, calm scenarios. As far as like then east versus west, it's going to come down to the water depth or the depth of water that you're targeting. Generally on our west shore, we're targeting anything from 4 to 12 feet, and we're going to be fishing lures that are a lot lighter in weight. Like I said, 1/4 ounce hair jigs, 3/8 ounce, maybe a half if it's really, really windy. But the rip and wrap choice on that side is definitely a number 6. It's a 1/2 ounce lure. It's a nice small profile, and fish over there absolutely love them. Whereas when you come over to the east side of the bay, and we're dealing with a lot deeper water, a lot of our fishing over here is 15 to 30 feet of water, and wanting to use baits that are a lot heavier, we can make better bottom contact. And as far as swim baits, it's going to be 3/4 ounce or 1 ounce. And then on that other side, it's going to be the lighter ones once again, 3/8, 1/4, maybe even a half on the windy days. One thing I see a lot with people that come over here with their own setups or rod and reels is they're generally undergunned. We're generally fishing big, heavy walleyes, and in this deeper water, we're generally fishing really heavy baits. So you need a rod that can really handle the lures, and there's 3 that I really lean on a lot. I've got my hair jig rod, which is generally a 7'9" medium fast. That's a SC5 blank from St. Croix, and a really nice handle configuration here in the back. And then as far as the lipless stuff, the rip and wraps, I'm going to run a 7'9" Thorn Brothers Predator and a medium extra fast. Again, a lot of power, a little bit quicker tip to make sure we're driving those treble hooks home. And then for the big swim baits, the 3/4 ounce stuff and the 1 ounce stuff, it's a medium heavy predator I've built at 7'10", and you want to have all that sensitivity. So working with a rod that has really high end graphite is very, very important so you can feel your bites. When these bigger fish hit these things, they can put a foot, 2, 3 feet of slack sometimes in your line. And that extra length in rod really helps you pick up a lot of line on your hook set versus with a shorter rod, you're not going to be able to pick up nearly as much line. And then what comes into play with that is our reels. I keep it pretty simple. I run a lot of 4,000 size reels, and I really like these Daiwa Tatulas. This is the new Tatula MQLT in the 4,000 size. Reason for the 4,000, we've got a really big wide spool arbor, so it's going to give us a lot of distance on our casts. And the Tatula, for me, I love due to the fact it's a 6.2 gear ratio. In the world of spinning reels, that's very, very fast. And as we're doing this kind of rip jigging or snap jigging, you need to be able to pick up that line quick as you're getting your bite or you're popping that lure. It makes it a lot easier to make 1 or 2 revolutions of the reel handle versus 4 or 5, right, with a slower gear ratio reel. So as we come off the rod and reel setup, we get into our line. And personally, I like a 10-pound braid. Today I'm using the Suffix 131 G-Core. I really like the nano braid as well. And it's really supple. It's a soft line. It's smooth, which allows for a lot further casts. 15-pound fluorocarbon leader. I've got it about 12 to 15 feet connected with an FG knot at the top. Reason being for this, the long leader length is we're constantly fishing around these mussel beds and the rocks, and you're going to get nicked up a lot. So there's a lot of retying that goes on. So if you look at like the spots that I've laid out in my graphs, you can see not only my auto chart that I went over, but then also specific waypoints that are color coordinated and even icon related to the end or the edge of the transition from rock to sand. Because as we're fishing these areas, we've got a lot of rock here, a lot of zebra mussels. If you get your lure up in that stuff, you're going to get hung up all the time or constantly. Making sure that you have the waypoints that you need in your graph, and then being able to reference not only your Mega Side, but your Mega 360 to make sure that you're making the specific casts to be on that transition or close to that edge, or even out into the sand is where you're going to want to be due to the fact you're not going to be losing baits constantly. And a lot of the spots I try and target are really those spots that have a lot of that sugar sand, but there are definitely areas that I fish that have a lot more of the mixed in rocks and boulders and zebra mussels. And then when I'm seeing that on my electronics, it's just going to play more into, maybe this isn't a place I'm going to want to throw a rip and wrap with 2 treble hooks. Maybe this is going to be something that's more a hair jig with a single hook or a swim bait with a single hook. Maybe I take that stinger hook off the back of my hair jig just so I can still effectively fish the spot and get down into the fish without, picking up zebra mussels or snagging on rocks and losing lures. Ooh, yeah. 29 1/4, old bluefin.